What if I told you that in the dead of night, while the world was asleep, history was being rewritten, not with words, but with fire from the skies? A superpower unleashed its might, targeting the heartbeat of a nation's ambition. Yet what followed was not surrender, but defiance that shook the world. This is not just another political drama. This is the raw, unfiltered story of how Iran, surrounded, struck, and scrutinized, stood unbroken. This is about courage when all seems lost, about dignity when the skies are burning, about the kind of strength that can't be measured in missiles or megatons, but in spirit. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't just a speech. It's a reminder that even when giants roar, even when darkness falls, there are voices that rise, nations that endure, and people like you who carry the power to resist, rebuild, and rise again. But till the end, because this isn't the story of war. It's the story of will, and it begins right now. Military operation conducted by the United States against Iran's hidden nuclear sites. These weren't ordinary open-air offensives. They were precision-sighted strikes designed to cripple specific locations suspected of housing nuclear enrichment technology or advanced research facilities buried deep underground or camouflaged within civilian zones. The operation was not preceded by any formal declaration or diplomatic warning, which amplified the shock value globally. The stealth involved from satellite-guided munitions to unmanned drones and electronic jamming of Iranian air defense systems reflected the technological prowess of the U.S. military, but it also raised significant ethical and geopolitical questions. News of the strikes broke, not through official channels, but through sudden blackouts in parts of Iran. Tremors felt in nearby towns and whispers on encrypted apps from citizens living near the affected regions. Global media outlets scrambled to verify details, and within hours, satellite images surfaced showing scorched earth, collapsed structures, and signs of an orchestrated attack. The U.S. government, initially silent, later confirmed the action with a carefully worded statement emphasizing the threat posed by Iran's alleged nuclear ambitions. This declaration, however, did little to ease international anxiety. The covert nature of the strike, the absence of a multilateral coalition, and the timing amid already heightened tensions pushed the global community into a state of diplomatic alert. Allies of the United States gave reserve support, framing the strikes as a necessary step toward non-proliferation. However, many countries, especially within the global south and non-down-like blocs, condemned the move. They argued that such unilateral military actions without UN authorization set a dangerous precedent. Russia and China issued strong warnings, while European nations expressed concern over the destabilization of an already fragile region. For the Middle East, the strike reignited fears of a wider war. Oil markets fluctuated, regional governments raised their military readiness levels, and militant factions threatened retaliation. In effect, this covert operation didn't just target nuclear infrastructure. It destabilized diplomatic equilibrium, pushed military alliances into overdrive, and introduced a new chapter in the unpredictable saga between Washington and Tehran. The psychological shockwaves extended beyond military consequences, shaking the foundation of international norms and reigniting long-standing debates about sovereignty, preemptive warfare, and a balance of power in a multipolar world. The immediate and calculated reaction of the Iranian leadership and its people in the aftermath of the U.S. airstrikes. Despite facing a technologically superior adversary and the destruction of sensitive sites, Iran's government did not respond with panic or political retreat. Instead, it responded with a tone of unshaken resistance. Within hours of the attacks, top Iranian officials appeared on national television, condemning the strikes as a blatant act of aggression and a violation of international sovereignty. Rather than admitting vulnerability, Iran portrayed the event as a proof of its victimhood and resolve, using it as a rallying cry for national unity and resistance against foreign domination. Iran's supreme leader, as well as its president and senior military commanders, vowed not only to rebuild the damaged infrastructure, but also to accelerate the country's defense and nuclear development programs, This response signaled two things. First, that Iran would not be intimidated into submission, and second, that any attempt to suppress its sovereignty would only strengthen its commitment to independence and strategic deterrence. Iranian military officials emphasized that their response would not necessarily be symmetrical, hinting at cyber retaliation, proxy engagement, or long-term strategic surprises. These statements were not merely threats, but part of a broader psychological strategy to assert control of the narrative, both domestically and internationally. On the streets, public demonstrations erupted in support of the leadership, not out of fear, but out of nationalist pride. Chants of resilience filled city squares, and images of the damaged sites were transformed into symbols of resistance, widely circulated through state and social media. Artists, clerics, students, and veterans voiced their anger and pride in unison, reinforcing a deeply embedded narrative that Iran has always been targeted for choosing dignity over submission and faith over compromise. The cultural memory of previous wars, particularly the Iran-IRK war, was reawakened and used as emotional fuel to mobilize the nation. Internationally, Iran engaged in diplomatic resistance. It summoned foreign ambassadors, launched official complaints to the UN, and sought to frame the attack as illegal under international law. By doing so, it aimed not only to challenge the military action, but to morally isolate the United States on the global stage. Iran's defiance was thus not just military or political, it was ideological, symbolic, and deeply rooted in its revolutionary identity, crafted to turn aggression into an opportunity for internal cohesion and global positioning. Ripple effect that followed the US strike on Iran's hidden nuclear sites, triggering a wave of heightened tensions across the Middle East. Iran's direct military capabilities are only one part of its broader strategic posture. Its true strength lies in its regional influence through a network of allied non-state actors and proxy militias. These include Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, and various armed groups in Syria. The moment the strikes were confirmed, these groups were either placed on high alert or began retaliatory maneuvers in response to the perceived violation of Iranian sovereignty. In Iraq, rocket attacks on U.S. military bases resumed after a period of relative calm, signaling a coordinated message from Iran-aligned factions. In Syria, Iranian positions near strategic locations came under Israeli and U.S.-backed attacks, prompting threats of regional reprisal. The Houthis launched missiles toward key infrastructure targets in Saudi Arabia and the UEA, framing their actions as solidarity with Iran. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, Hezbollah increased its mobilization along the southern border, raising fears of a new front opening against Israel. These flashpoints, while individually contained, collectively contributed to a destabilized region teetering on the edge of a wider war. The fear of escalation extended far beyond the battlefield. Oil prices spiked globally due to perceived risks to Gulf shipping lanes, especially in the Strait of Hormuz, a vital artery for the world's energy supply. International investors pulled back from regional markets, and airlines rerouted or canceled flights through Middle Eastern airspace. Diplomatic missions across the region went into emergency mode, with embassies issuing warnings or temporarily halting operations in high-risk zones. Global powers like Russia and China began reinforcing their own alliances and messaging in the region, hoping to counterbalance U.S. influence while avoiding being pulled into the conflict directly. This surge in instability also exposed fragile internal dynamics in several countries. Iraq's already divided government faced renewed pressure from competing loyalties to the U.S. and Iran. Lebanon's economy, already on the brink, braced for further collapse under the strain of conflict. Even U.S. allies like Jordan and Egypt grew uneasy, fearing that another drawn-out confrontation between Washington and Tehran would unleash waves of refugees, economic disruption, and internal. The proxy web, once used by Iran as a strategic deterrent, had now transformed into a ticking time bomb, threatening to engulf the entire region in chaos. The complex global reaction to the U.S. strike on Iran's hidden nuclear sites, exposing deep divisions in the international community, over how to handle Tehran's growing influence and nuclear ambitions. Following the attack, countries around the world were forced to take a stance, some siding with the U.S. narrative of preemptive defense, while others viewed the operation as an unlawful act of aggression. This divide was not just ideological, but also deeply rooted in geopolitical alignments, economic interests, and historical alliances. U.S. allies such as the United Kingdom, Israel, and some members of the Gulf Cooperation Council expressed either full support or silent approval, arguing that the strike was a necessary step to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. They viewed the operation through a security lens, emphasizing the threat Iran poses to regional stability and Western interests. Israeli officials were among the most vocal, framing the attack as a validation of their long-standing warnings about Iran's secret nuclear activities. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, although cautious in tone, reportedly provided logistical or intelligence support, seeing Iran's empowerment as a direct threat to their regimes. In contrast, major powers like Russia and China condemned the strike, characterizing it as a reckless, unilateral move that undermined international law and the authority of global institutions like the United Nations. These nations emphasized diplomacy over force and accused the United States of violating Iran's sovereignty. Moscow and Beijing, both of whom have deep economic and strategic ties with Tehran, warned that continued aggression could spiral into a larger conflict with unpredictable consequences. European countries found themselves in a difficult position. Nations like France and Germany expressed concern over Iran's nuclear intentions, but criticized the strike for bypassing diplomatic channels and increasing the risk of war. Their priority remained preserving what was left of the Iran nuclear deal and avoiding a total collapse of dialogue. Smaller nations in non-aligned countries also voiced their disapproval, concerned that the normalization of preemptive strikes erodes international norms and encourages other powerful states to act similarly in future conflicts. Global institutions struggled to issue a unified response, with the UN Security Council divided and largely paralyzed. This fragmentation revealed not only the deep geopolitical fissures that define today's world order, but also the growing difficulty in forging international consensus in the face of escalating militarized crises. As each side entrenched further into their positions, the prospect of coordinated global action became more elusive. The information war that unfolded alongside the physical conflict following the U.S. strike on Iran's hidden nuclear sites. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, there was a noticeable silence in mainstream Western media, with early reports either downplaying the scale of the strike or framing it within a narrow security narrative. The lack of real-time coverage, the delay in releasing images, and the absence of investigative reporting gave rise to widespread speculation that certain details were being deliberately suppressed to manage public perception and prevent panic or backlash. Iranian state media, on the other hand, released selective footage showing damage to sites and funerals of military personnel, framing the attack as cowardly and provocative. As information began to leak through unofficial channels such as videos posted by civilians, satellite imagery from independent researchers, and on-the-ground testimonies shared through social media platforms, a new version of the story began to emerge. These raw, unfiltered sources contradicted official narratives, showing more extensive destruction, civilian displacement, and unreported casualties. This disconnect between official reports and citizen journalism fueled public skepticism, especially among global audiences that have grown increasingly distrustful of state-aligned media outlets. Platforms like X, Telegram, and TikTok became battlegrounds for truth, misinformation, and emotionally charged content. Viral hashtags demanded accountability and transparency, while influencers and independent journalists helped amplify suppressed voices. The censorship or selective reporting ignited outrage not only in Iran, but also across various regions that have historically suffered from Western military interventions. Public demonstrations took place in several countries, with protesters accusing Western powers of warmongering and condemning the media for its complicity in shaping biased narratives. In Western societies, a growing number of citizens began questioning the motives behind the strike and the role of their own governments. Academics, activists, and even former diplomats publicly criticized the media blackout, arguing that withholding information undermined democratic accountability and public awareness. In Iran, the regime capitalized on this outcry, using the media's silence in the West to reinforce its narrative of victimhood and resistance. The perceived media suppression was presented as evidence of a global conspiracy to undermine Iranian sovereignty and demonize its government. This narrative found strong resonance among regional populations and diaspora communities, many of whom were already disillusioned with the double standards of international media coverage. The result was a significant erosion of trust in traditional news outlets and a surge in reliance on decentralized grassroots forms of information sharing, reshaping how people engage with global conflicts. The transformative impact the U.S. strikes had, not only on Iran, but on the broader collective consciousness of the region. Rather than forcing Iran into submission or isolation, the attack acted as a catalyst for unity and renewed defiance among nations, movements, and populations that have long felt oppressed or undermined by foreign intervention. Iran's ability to stand tall in the face of military aggression became a symbol for many, reigniting a narrative of resilience and dignity that echoed across the Muslim world. This resistance was not limited to political leadership, but was deeply rooted in the people's sense of identity, history, and pride. Images of Iranian citizens waving national flags amid ruins, chants of unity reverberating through mosques and streets, and powerful statements from Iranian officials all contributed to the formation of a new regional psyche, one that sees resistance as not only necessary, but honorable. Religious leaders, scholars, and even youth groups across countries like Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine invoked Iran's stance as an example of what it means to defend sovereignty against superpowers. The symbolism of standing alone, yet unbending, resonated with communities that have long been subjected to drone strikes, sanctions, and foreign occupation. In many ways, the event reawakened memories of colonial struggles, invasions, and past betrayals by Western powers. Social media became a powerful amplifier of these sentiments, with content creators, activists, and intellectuals across the region uniting in their messaging, voicing solidarity with Iran while criticizing the global imbalance of power. The younger generation, often more digitally connected and globally aware, began reshaping the language of resistance. They embraced a narrative that fused national pride with anti-imperialism, Islam with modern activism, and heritage with defiance. Militant groups also drew renewed legitimacy from Iran's reaction, using it to validate their own causes and appeal to broader Arab and Muslim unity. But beyond militancy, there was a more widespread ideological shift taking place. Governments and movements began revisiting their security policies, regional alliances, and diplomatic strategies. The idea of Middle Eastern autonomy, political, military, and economic, gained momentum. Iran's defiance was seen as proof that survival and even strength is possible without submission to global powers. This marked the beginning of a psychological shift where resistance was no longer just reactive. It became strategic, visionary, and shared, laying the groundwork for a new chapter in regional self-determination. In the aftermath of a bold and calculated strike by a global superpower, Iran did not collapse. It did not cower. It stood defiant, not just as a nation, but as a symbol of unshakable resolve for millions across the world. This moment was more than a military clash. It was a battle between dominance and dignity, power and principle, fear and faith. The world watched as missiles fell, but what echoed louder was the voice of a people who chose resistance over retreat, honor over humiliation. Iran's response became a rallying cry for those who refused to be silenced, a signal that in the face of overwhelming force, the human spirit still rises. This is not the end of a conflict. It is the birth of a new era, one defined by unity, identity, and an unwavering belief that no empire, no matter how mighty, can erase the will of a people who refuse to be conquered. To every listener across the globe, thank you for lending your time, your mind, and your heart to this message. May this story inspire you to stand firm in your own battles, to speak truth when silence is expected, and to rise when others expect you to fall. In a world that often rewards power, May you always remember the power of principle. Good luck on your journey. Stay strong in your convictions. And never forget, the world changes not by the loudest voices, but by the strongest hearts. Thank you.